Hi, everyone. Thank you for those who are joining us today for a webinar on the state's draft priority climate action plan under the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program. Also joined today by some of the metropolitan statistical areas from the northern part of the state. Before we get started, I want to make sure that everyone can participate in the language of their choice. Today's webinar will be available in English and Spanish through simultaneous translation. To select your language option, click on the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select your language. I will let the interpreters say this message in Spanish as well. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Sarah Joe. Muy buenas tardes a aquellos que nos acompañan de habla hispana. Queremos dejarles saber que tenemos interpretación disponible. Puede seleccionar su idioma. Aquí en breve aparecerá en la parte inferior de su pantalla un icono de un globo que dice Interpretation o interpretación, como puede ver en la foto. Selecciónelo y de ahí seleccione su idioma Spanish o español y silenciar audio original si así lo desea. Y así podrá escuchar el programa enteramente en su idioma. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you, Sarah Joe. Back to you.
Thank you, Mark. Okay. So I hope everybody is in the language channel of their choice now, and we will go ahead and get started. So hello, I'm Sarah Jo Shambellin, International Advisor in the Executive Office at the California Air Resources Board. I've also been serving as the Project Manager for the state on the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants effort. To get started, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for joining the virtual public webinar to present the state's draft Priority Climate Action Plan. It will be submitted on March 1st under the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program, or CPRG. We are pleased to partner with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency on the CPRG program. We see this as an opportunity not only to draft climate plans and implement the state's climate priorities, but as a way to partner with the federal government and help deliver the emissions reductions necessary to meet the commitments under the Paris Agreement and to avoid the worst effects of climate change. The Priority Climate Action Plan that we will present today is a milestone in an ongoing relationship with our federal partners at EPA, with tribal nations, with fellow state agencies, and representatives from counties, cities, air districts, and of course, with all of you. We are committed to continuing our work together to find shared climate solutions that maximize emissions reductions and bring cleaner air and lasting benefits for all of our communities, particularly those long overburdened with pollution. I'd like to thank all the state and local agencies that have been involved in this effort. I'm pleased to say that you will hear from some of them today. So with that, I will go over some webinar logistics, which you see on the slide. The webinar today is being recorded and will be posted to our CPRG webpage. We have 2 hours allotted and we have a great turnout with just about 100 people attending. As you will see a little bit later in the agenda, we have a number of state and local agencies that will present before we turn the floor over to comments. We will work to hear from as many commenters as possible, so we ask stakeholders to keep their feedback to no longer than 3 minutes and to submit longer comments in writing. Stakeholders will be able to submit written feedback online until February 10th at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. You can find a link to submit feedback as well as relevant documents, including this presentation, on our CPRG webpage. Next slide. So today's agenda has 5 parts. First, we'll give an overview of the CPRG program. Second, we'll give a summary of the state's process to develop the Priority Climate Action Plan, or PCAP. And third, we will hear from several state agency representatives on California's PCAP measures, which make up the bulk of our PCAP. Fourth, we'll hear from metropolitan statistical areas from Northern California. And lastly, we will open up the floor to hear your feedback, questions, and anything else that you would like to share with us today. Our goal for this webinar is to share our progress to date under CPRG and to hear any comments that you would like to share. Next slide. So let's just give a quick overview of what CPRG is. It was created under the Inflation Reduction Act and is administered by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And the CPRG program has two distinct phases. In the first, states, metropolitan areas, tribes, and territories applied for planning grants to deliver 3 climate plans over 4 years. In the second phase, entities can compete for $4.6 billion in funding to implement the actions that are listed in the first plan, the Priority Climate Action Plan, which we are discussing today. In California, the state and 10 metropolitan statistical areas and several tribes have been offered a planning grant. So I'm glad that we can hear from some of them today. Let's go on to the next slide. So we're focusing on the PCAP today, but it's also worth noting that this is just the first of 3 plans that we'll deliver under CPRG. The slide summarizes California's distinct priorities for each of the 3 climate plans. For the PCAP due on March 1st, California has prioritized outreach and coordination across the many stakeholders and tribal nations. Given that listing and action in the PCAP is a prerequisite for competitive CPRG funding, this outreach is critical. The Comprehensive Climate Action Plan due in mid-2025 will look at all greenhouse gas emission sources and all carbon sinks. And and because of that, it will be a longer list of climate actions, and the plan will require more analysis alongside continued coordination and outreach. The 2027 status report will coincide with the next scoping plan update that we do at CARB, and it will include a summary of implementation actions as well as next steps to reduce emissions reductions. Next slide. This slide shows the timeline and steps in developing the Priority Climate Action Plan. We have been working on an accelerated timeline since our award in September to hold dozens of meetings with various stakeholders and with tribal nations to coordinate and develop the measures that you will see presented below. In addition, the state received roughly 50 written comments from various stakeholders suggesting climate actions for the state's Priority Climate Action Plan. We included all the measures that we could, and we have begun to analyze them. Our final PCAP will be submitted to EPA on March 1st. Applications from states, MSAs, local governments, and other eligible entities are due to EPA on April 1st. Next slide. For any climate measure to be eligible for CPRG implementation funding, it must be in a PCAP. And with this in mind, the state has 3 goals for its PCAP. First, our goal is to represent a no-regrets list of urgently needed climate investments aligned with the state and CPRG climate and equity goals. The second is to ensure that our measures are aligned with MSAs leading their own CPRG efforts so that we can maximize climate investment across the state. And finally, our PCAP needs to ensure that it includes actions that other local governments without a planning grant want to see so that they can pursue their own applications. It's important to emphasize this third bullet. Our PCAP has currently incorporated ideas from local governments without a planning grant, and we hope that those governments will submit their own CPRG implementation applications as they see fit. I want to note that EPA is looking for optional notices of intent to apply today. And you can find this information and other information on the EPA's website with the link provided here. Next slide. So California's PCAP includes many elements, and before we go into what is in the PCAP, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about how we have developed our PCAP. So first, it includes the list of elements here: continued conversation and coordination with stakeholders across the state, as well as with tribal nations; ongoing synthesis of the state's existing and emerging climate plans and reports; a package of greenhouse gas emissions estimates, including our statewide greenhouse gas inventory, and relying on greenhouse gas targets from state statute. We are also in the process of estimating the emissions reductions of each of the climate measures that we will include in our PCAP. And we are finalizing assessments of the following: the benefits of climate action and how those benefits accrue to low-income and disadvantaged communities, the authority of the state to implement the proposed measures, how CPRG climate actions complement the state's overall federal funding strategy, and how workforce needs and implications of the proposed measures. Next slide. Our PCAP is aligned with the state's broad climate strategy, most recently outlined by the 2022 Scoping Plan Update, which charts a path toward carbon neutrality by 2045 and to reducing anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions 85% below 1990 levels by 2045. It incorporates both economy-wide emissions reductions and strategies to store carbon in healthy ecosystems and through mechanical means. Achieving carbon neutrality is California's most ambitious goal ever. Federal investment is needed as part of this work, and it will deliver major benefits. For example, the 2022 Scoping Plan update shows that by 2045, we will need 37 times as many light, medium, and heavy duty zero emission vehicles on the road, 6 times as many electric appliances in homes, 1,700 times as much hydrogen supply, 4 times as much installed wind and solar generation capacity, and action on over 2.5 million acres of natural and working lands every year. The key outcomes are part of a suite of actions driving substantial greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Achieving the plan's outcomes will also result in great benefits, including a 94% decrease in liquid petroleum demand, a 91% decrease in fossil fuel used in buildings, and a 66% decrease in methane emissions from agriculture, and finally, a 10% reduction in wildfire emissions. Our PCAP measures and CPRG funding can help us implement near-term measures that are required for the sustained transformation over the next 2 decades. Next slide. There are also many contributors to our PCAP. This is a list of the types of partners that we have been engaging with that we will be engaging with throughout our 4-year CPRG program and during the PCAP. We have our state agency CPRG task force members. We have local governments such as metropolitan statistical areas, counties, cities. We have air districts, tribal nations, low-income and disadvantaged community members, nonprofits, the private sector, and members of the public. Next slide. Like California's overall climate efforts, the development of this PCAP has been a multi-agency effort, particularly for the state agency CPRG task force members, as shown here. Next slide. We are also coordinating with all of the MSAs across the state that have their own planning grant so that we can join forces where we can and so that we can complement each other's actions in other ways. The gray area on the state map here are all of the local governments that don't have a planning grant. We've tried to reach out to them as well to make sure that their priorities are included in the state PCAP. Next slide. So the state has also conducted outreach to tribes through numerous virtual and in-person events and is consulting with tribes on a government-to-government basis. Our final PCAP will reflect those conversations. Next slide. Low-income communities and communities of color face disparate impacts from climate change and from the cost of confronting it. The state has centered equity throughout its scoping plan and other processes. And for CPRG, we are following EPA's guidance and assessing how our PCAP will affect low-income and disadvantaged communities as defined by the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, or CJEST, as well as the supplemental data from EPA's Environmental Justice Screening and Mapping Tool, also called EJ Screen. These areas are shown in yellow and light blue on this map. Next slide. In developing the climate measures in our PCAP, we are paying particular attention to the scoring criteria for the competitive portion of the CPRG program. We have aimed to achieve we have aimed to elevate urgent funding needs that will be competitive under this program. EPA seems to be prioritizing measures that are well thought out and ready to implement, achieve significant greenhouse gas reductions, particularly in the near term, the 2025 to 2030 timeframe, yield significant co-benefits such as air quality improvements, and ensure that those benefits accrue to low-income and disadvantaged communities. EPA also seems to want to see that these measures create jobs and that agencies have a track record and the staff and the capacity to implement each measure. Next slide. Lastly, we are leveraging our greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the PCAP alongside other granular greenhouse gas emissions reduction estimates for each measure. This pie chart breaks down the statewide emissions as for specific greenhouse gases that were originally included in our 2006 Climate Bill AB 32. Our natural and working lands inventory is separate and is not included here. We'll now go into our PCAP measures, which I want to remind the audience are draft and subject to change. We will start with transportation, our largest source of greenhouse gas emissions across the state. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, great. So in addition to being the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, medium and heavy duty vehicles contribute to air pollution across the state. We have many priority measures to address these challenges, these shared challenges. In addition, I want to highlight that the double asterisks on this slide and the slides that follow indicate measures that are particularly suited to local government authorities that don't have their own planning grant and might be seeking to point to our PCAP for their own applications. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Bruce to discuss the first two measures on this
slide. All right, Sarah Jo, thank you so much. So first of all, I am Bruce Tudor from the California Air Resources Board. I work, pardon me, in our Mobile Source Control Division. MSCD oversees most of the on and off-road heavy-duty regulations and incentive programs. So first of all, we have two measures that we're including in the PCAP. And the first being creating a truck buy-down program that would expand financing options for small fleets to buy zero-emission trucks. And this is a market that really currently isn't served by the private sector. This would leverage the success of three existing incentive and loan programs that we either have now or are about to start, and help deliver emission reductions quickly. The second program aims to deploy more clean off-road equipment, such as forklifts, cranes, locomotives, farm equipment, and more. This could expand CARB's core program, which is the incentive program for those that clean off-road equipment core, or local. So this could expand CARB's existing program, or local governments could apply for such zero-emission equipment on their own. So both of these would address sources of air pollution for low-income and disadvantaged communities. And I'll turn it back over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Bruce. At this point, I'd like to ask Jennifer to take the virtual stage.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, my name is Jennifer Duran. Good afternoon, everyone. I am the Port and Freight Infrastructure Program Manager in the Caltrans Technical Freight Office within the Division of Transportation Planning. In 2022, CalSTA established the Port and Freight Infrastructure Program, or PFIP is what we call it. The PFIP is a landmark program for implementing clean, efficient, sustainable, and resilient components within the state's freight system. PFIP projects will significantly transform our freight system, but we do know that more funding is needed to scale the program and build additional shovel-ready projects. The PFIP is not going to be included in the CARB statewide implementation application, but we do feel it's important to include within the statewide action plan to highlight it as a state priority. We'd like to encourage regions to include freight infrastructure projects in your upcoming applications. CARB will share my contact information after today's meeting, so please feel free to email me if you're interested in discussing including port and freight projects in your PCAP or implementation applications. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the next measures, I'm going to ask Jim to take the stage.
Here we are on our virtual stage. Thank you, Sarah Jo. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Jim McKinney with the California Energy Commission, where I am a senior policy analyst in our Fuels and Transportation Division. I want to talk about our CPRG truck charging proposal. So we have 1 million trucks in the state that are essential to efficient goods movement and a healthy state economy. These 1 million trucks represent just 3% of our 30 million vehicles, but generate disproportionate amounts of carbon, particulates, and NOx emissions. 25% of our on-road GHG emissions come from diesel exhaust, 33% of on-road NOx, and 70% of the known cancer risks from toxic air contaminants. Reducing diesel emissions will create important climate reduction and public health benefits for those communities located near freeway corridors, ports, and warehouse districts. Electrifying our truck fleet is one of the most promising technologies for reducing transportation diesel emissions, fuel cells being the other. We have just a handful of operational zero-emission trucks in the state now, less than 300 heavy-duty trucks and about 350 delivery vans. But going forward, we think this will change rapidly. There are 140,000 orders we've identified for new zero-emission trucks nationwide, and we can assume that more than half will come to California, as has happened with the passenger car fleet. The Advanced Clean Fleets and Advanced Clean Trucks regulations from CARB will further drive adoption, and the major truck OEMs are developing zero-emission vehicles. This includes Volvo, Daimler, PACCAR, and Navistar. So there's an immense need for truck chargers. By 2030, we estimate we'll need 155,000 trucks in California, and to support them, we'll need 109,000 depot chargers and 5,500 public chargers. By 2035, we're estimating 377,000 trucks that will be electrified. So we'll need 250,000 depot chargers and 8,500 public chargers. The Energy Commission runs a program called CEC Energize, Infrastructure Incentives for Zero-Emission Commercial Vehicles. It's the country's first large-scale commercial fleet ZEV infrastructure funding program, and it's administered by CalSTART, very ably, I will say. It's designed to fund near-term shovel-ready projects, and the awards to date, sorry, somebody's trying to call me. Excuse me there. It's designed to fund near-term shovel-ready projects, and the awards to date are about 190 awards worth $115 million, and that's funded 1,800 chargers. Some of these award windows have filled literally within minutes of our posting them. So we believe this is an ideal method to rapidly distribute federal CPRG funding to shovel-ready truck charging projects. And now I will say a little bit about the local deployment for ZEVs and ZEV infrastructure. Local and tribal governments in rural areas have the authority to plan and develop charging infrastructure and to compete for incentive funding through existing state and federal programs. Charger installations in rural areas are occurring more slowly than urban and suburban areas, denying those communities the economic and environmental benefits of ZEV adoption. One reason is that there is often not enough demand from ZEV drivers to justify private investment. Another issue may be that existing incentive funding programs are often highly competitive, and local and tribal governments may not have the staff capacity to compete against their urban and metro scale government counterparts. This measure seeks to use community-level CPRG funding in rural and tribal communities so that they can also enjoy the economic, environmental, and technical benefits of zero-emission transportation. Thank you, and I'm going to turn this back to Sarah Jo.
Thanks so much, Jim. And finally, for the sixth measure on this slide, this measure represents transportation actions that have been previously uplifted by communities through CARB's Clean Mobility in Schools program, the Sustainable Transportation Project, STEP, and the Clean Mobility Options program. This measure could cover a diverse collection of projects, including active transportation infrastructure, new and expanded zero-emission public transit and school bus services, and shared mobility services such as zero-emission microtransit and e-bike lending libraries. And again, this is one that we are putting in our PCAP so that local governments without their own planning grant can also pursue some of these actions. Next slide. Thanks. So California's industrial sector, turning to this sector, includes various industrial processes, including upstream oil and gas extraction, and accounts for roughly 19% of California's total emissions. I will turn it over to Alex to present the one industrial measure that California has proposed for its PCAP. Thanks, Alex.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Franchik. I'm from the California Energy Commission. So this industrial PCAP measure will allow for the expansion of the Industrial Decarbonization and Improvement to Grid Operations Program, or what we call INDIGO, which the CEC is currently administering. So what the INDIGO program does is it provides incentives for industrial projects that provide benefits to the electrical grid and reduce greenhouse gas and local air pollution. The INDIGO program targets California's manufacturing sector and includes chemicals, metals, food and beverage, non-metallic minerals, and related support facilities. So with possible bolstered funding from CPRG implementation grant funds, additional Indigo projects could accelerate decarbonization of California's industry, expand opportunities to reduce stress on the electric grid, and provide other co-benefits such as improved air quality, job creation, among others. Thanks, Sarah. Joe.
Thanks, Alex. Let's go to the next slide. So now we're going to move into our energy and electricity measures. So electricity currently comprises 16% of the state's greenhouse gas emissions, according to the latest inventory. And our energy measures also include some energy fuels here as well. As the state begins to implement broad-scale efforts to reach carbon neutrality by 2045, clean, affordable, and reliable electricity and a stable grid will serve as the backbone to support deep decarbonization across California's economy. The measures presented would each play a unique and important role in that transition. To begin, I will turn it to my colleague Monica at CEC.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Monica Redmond of the California Energy Commission, representing the Energy Conservation Assistant Account Program, or as we call it, ECA. We appreciate the opportunity to expand the success of the ECA program. ECA is one of the longest running programs at the California Energy Commission, having been in existence since 1979. The Energy Commission developed it to assist public agencies, schools, tribes to install energy efficiency and clean energy generation projects. The program provides financing for eligible measures, including solar systems, fleet EV charging infrastructure, on-site energy storage, lighting retrofits, control systems, and HVAC efficiency improvements. The program has funded projects in every one of California's counties and has served many disadvantaged communities. Since the inception of the program, ECA has funded more than 950 projects totaling over $1.5 billion. ECA is separated into two sub-programs, ECA Regular and ECA Educational. ECA Regular is for public entities such as local governments, California Native American tribes, and special districts such as park and water districts. This program offers 1% interest loans with a maximum loan amount of $3 million. The ECA Educational Subaccount, commonly referred to as ECA Ed, is open to certain public schools, school districts, and charter schools. ECA Ed offers 0% interest loans with the loan maximums from $3 to $5 million, depending on the project. Project measures, when installed, create energy and cost savings for the loan recipients. And additionally, when fossil fuel use is reduced, the measures installed reduce greenhouse gases. When the projects are completed, the loan recipients pay back the loan, and the Energy Commission then relends the funds, so it's self-sustaining in that way. There is currently a waiting list for loans. With the expansion of the ECA program from CPRG funds, the Energy Commission will be able to award more than 20 additional loans, including loans to California Native American tribes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. For the next two measures on this slide, I'd like to invite Lu Wam to take the virtual stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Lu Wam Tesfaye. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Energy and Climate Policy at the California Public Utilities Commission. My pronouns are she, her. So the first proposal that I'll be presenting on is what we are calling our Distribution System Capacity Upgrades Funding Program. And you'll be hearing a lot today about proposals related to transportation electrification or microgrids. And this proposal is really foundational to supporting those types of initiatives. The Distribution System Capacity Upgrades Funding Program proposal would leverage the funds from the CPRG to spur upgrades to the electric distribution system, to increase capacity and support climate initiatives like transportation and building electrification, for example. Electrification programs are key to reducing California's reliance on fossil fuels for internal combustion engine vehicles and space and water heating that leverages natural gas. California has already created numerous incentives to help customers buy electric vehicles or install electric vehicle charging infrastructure, as well as buying heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. But these technologies require buildings and sites to draw more electricity than the current distribution system is equipped for. So this isn't just a matter of generating more electricity, it's about upgrading the poles, lines, and wires to be able to bring that electricity to customers and to different sites. This is requiring costly upgrades to the distribution system that historically were all paid for by electric ratepayers in their monthly bills. But this creates a disincentive to customers to electrify because all of these upgrades are causing electricity costs to go up, which prevents customers from, or disincentivizes customers from wanting to use electricity, for example, to charge their vehicles, etc. So this program proposal would create a new fund to help pay for these costly distribution system upgrades that are needed to support California's electrification goals. The program would be implemented by the California Public Utilities Commission in consultation with our sister agencies like the California Energy Commission, who's funding electric vehicle charging infrastructure, as well as the California Air Resources Board, who's funding electric vehicle incentive programs, as well as creating new regulations to shift to zero-emission vehicles and appliances. So that's the description for the distribution capacity upgrades proposal. And so Sarah, can I go ahead and jump to the behind the meter battery storage for self-generation incentive program?
Of course, please.
Great, thank you. So the second proposal that I'm presenting on is called Enhancing Resilience and Reducing Greenhouse Gas Emissions by Leveraging Behind the Meter Energy Storage via the Self-Generation Incentive Program. So the project proposal would provide funding for behind-the-meter energy storage for residential customers with a focus on low-income residential customers to enhance their resilience, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and support affordability. This proposed action would expand an existing California program known as the Self-Generation Incentive Program that we have been managing for over 20 years, and it's been very successful at distributing funding to customers. But these new added funds would really help to scale up the program to make it transformative. So some of the major features would be to provide low-income residential customers with behind-the-meter energy storage, which helps to enhance their resilience for these customers in the event of a power outage, for example. In addition to that, California has adopted time of use rates, which reflect higher prices during times of the day when fossil fuel resources are most in use, like gas power plants, between the hours of, typically 4 and 9 p.m., and lower prices when greenhouse gas-free resources are plentiful, midday, when we have a lot of solar. So this behind-the-meter storage will be programmed to charge during the times of the day when rates are the lowest, and then batteries will be leveraged during net peak between that 4 and 9 period when greenhouse gas emissions are the highest and prices are also the highest. So that's an added affordability benefit for customers, as well as an added benefit to the grid as a whole for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Leveraging behind-the-meter storage in this way also helps to reduce demand on the grid, which enhances reliability of the electric grid overall. And then also, in addition to that, if customers are enrolled in demand response programs, excess battery storage from their systems, if it's available, can even be batched together as a new resource for a virtual power plant. Another key component of this program is that when you're pairing battery storage with rooftop solar, for example, customers are able to get the highest level of incentives for their rooftop solar because it has storage and is actually benefiting the grid. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks and turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to invite Graham to speak about the next measure.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Graham St. Michel. I'm with the California Department of Conservation. The department's Biomass to Carbon Negative Biofuels program seeks to fund projects that will convert California forest and agricultural biomass waste into carbon negative fuels. If supported with federal funding, the program looks to expand its scope statewide beyond its original limitation to projects located in the Sierra Nevada. This expansion in scope would also draw on projects that utilize agricultural biomass in addition to forest biomass, thereby helping to catalyze a viable private market for these wastes and addressing climate impacts associated with both California agriculture and forest wildfires. The program also includes a woody biomass feedstock aggregation pilot component, which is exploring methods to promote a more predictable feedstock supply, especially in regard to forest waste. All right, I'll turn back to you, Sergio.
Thanks, Graham. For number 5 here, let's go ahead and have Alex. Hi, Alex. Go take it away.
Hi, Alex Ranchik again from the California Energy Commission. So this renewable microgrids for rural communities and tribes measure would enable local governments and tribal nations in rural parts of the state to pursue clean energy microgrid projects through the CPRG implementation grants. These projects can support energy reliability and resilience for their communities, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and provide other benefits such as economic development, improved air quality, and job creation. Thanks.
Thank you. And for this 6th idea here on the slide, this is a measure that has been elevated by local jurisdictions to create renewable energy, including renewable hydrogen, from various organic waste sources such as landfill methane, woody biomass, yard and agricultural waste, and biosolids. Let's go to the next slide. So now we are going to talk about the high global warming potential measure that we have here. So to frame this, the high global warming potential sector in the state accounts for about 6% of our emissions, and they have an outsized impact on climate change in the near term, with thousands of times the global warming potential of CO2, especially in the near term. So we are including here one measure. Our measure would expand CARB's existing F-gas reduction incentive program, also known as FRIP, and it would leverage the success of this program to really bring down F-gas emissions from commercial and industrial refrigeration systems. We'll keep it at that, and let's move on to the next slide. So for agriculture, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Margaret. Thanks, Margaret.
Hello, everybody. My name is Margaret Phipps, and I'm with the California Department of Food and Agriculture. California has the largest agricultural economy in the U.S., with over 400 specialty crops, producing 1/3 of the country's vegetables and 75% of the country's fruits and nuts. Dairy products are our top commodity and bring in over $10 billion per year. 8% of the state's greenhouse gas emissions come from the agriculture and forestry sectors, with 35% of those emissions coming from dairy manure management. So for the PCAP, CDFA has raised 2 already established programs, our Healthy Soils Program and our Dairy Digester Research and Development Program. Expanding the Healthy Soils Program would allow for the investment in on-farm practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and sequester carbon, while also providing technical assistance to support implementation. And expansion of our Dairy Digester program would focus on opportunities for participation by smaller dairies, as well as support research for producing hydrogen from digester biogas. Currently, the Dairy Digester program is our most cost-effective program in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And because my colleagues from the California Natural Resources Agency couldn't be here, I'm going to discuss natural and working lands at a high level with you all. So as climate change increases the likelihood of extreme wildfire, drought, heat, and other impacts, carbon stocks in California's natural and working lands will face increased risks and other impacts. Natural working lands cover approximately 90% of the state's 105 million acres and include California Native American tribal, ancestral, and cultural lands. They include parks and green spaces in our cities and communities, and water and iconic landscapes that the nation knows and loves. The first measure in our PCAP would bolster the Forest Health Program, an initiative of the California Department of Forest and Fire Protection, or CAL FIRE, and it would expand funding for critical range of activities, including fuel reduction, controlled burns, pest management, reforestation projects, and biomass utilization. The second measure on this slide would expand the urban and community forest project across the state. It would help increase urban canopies while delivering energy conservation and stormwater runoff reduction, improving air, soil, and water quality, and enhancing public health and property values. Third on this slide, this measure would further the achievement of the state's existing wetland restoration program to support a variety of wetland restoration projects, including re-wetting peat soils to reduce carbon emissions, restoring mountain meadows for carbon sequestration, and enhancing wetland biodiversity. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Coming to the waste sector, I will turn it over to Scott.
Hey everybody, my name is Scott Beckner, and I manage the Business Assistance and Market Development team here at CalRecycle. And I coordinated the development of CalRecycle's proposals for this PCAP. Of the proposals we prepared, 2 of them are included in the draft statewide PCAP: organics, recycling infrastructure, and food waste prevention and recovery. Both are existing programs at CalRecycle, but could be administered locally as well. So we encourage MSAs and locals to really consider including these and other materials management priorities, such as reuse, source reduction, in their PCAPs. If this isn't in a PCAP that covers your location, you can't apply for it. That's kind of the way it seems to work on this program. So, starting with food waste prevention and edible food recovery, these are strategies to reduce the amount of food wasted and landfilled, and they represent significant opportunities to help relieve food insecurity issues that millions of Californians face every day. And they just so happen to also reduce a substantial amount of greenhouse gases. According to our recent waste characterization study, 4.3 million tons of food is sent to landfill each year in California, and 1.5 million tons of that is potentially donatable food. So huge opportunity here. To date, CalRecycle has provided about $28 million through several grant programs. That's resulted in the equivalent of approximately 242 million meals recovered. So we've done a lot, and there's still a heck of a lot to do. We believe these CPRG funds can continue the good work California has already done in this space, particularly given the current budget situation and unclear funding picture for new cycles of these grants. And I want to encourage MSAs to include similar language in their own PCAPs. Again, I'll say this a few times to maximize the impact we have of these funds. The second climate action that's included in the draft PCAP is expanding California's composting, anaerobic digestion, and co-digestion infrastructure, as well as infrastructure to recycle biomass feedstocks. When the state's SB 1383 program is fully implemented, we'll need to divert an additional 12 to 14 million tons of organic waste from landfills, but we currently have an organics recycling capacity shortfall of about 8 million tons. This really underscores how critical the need is to continue investing in this infrastructure. And despite significant contributions from the state, funding has been insufficient to meet the rising demand. In our 2023 grant cycle alone, we awarded over $130 million to 23 projects, our largest grant cycle ever. But 10 eligible projects were still waitlisted due to lack of funds, and the CPRG funding could bring these projects to fruition and could attract substantial matching private investments in the process. There are countless other opportunities in the waste sector not captured here, including, as I said, reuse and source reduction and others. We really want to encourage MSAs, again, to consider including materials management in your PCAPs. Thanks again, Sarah Jo, for all your hard work coordinating this.
Thank you so much, Scott. Let's go to the next slide. And with this, I am very glad to welcome to the virtual stage our counterparts from the MSAs. We have 2 MSAs joining us here today, the Santa Clara San Benito MSA and also the San Francisco Alameda MSA. So we're going to start with the representatives from Santa Clara. So I will turn it over to Gilly, I believe.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Gilly Corral, Sustainability Manager with the County of Santa Clara Office of Sustainability. And as Sarah Jo mentioned, our PCAP covers the San Jose, Sunnyvale, Santa Clara MSA, which includes both Santa Clara County and San Benito County. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of how we're engaging stakeholders in our PCAP and a quick glance of the required technical elements and including the missions inventory and assessment of disadvantaged communities, and just close out with a high-level overview of our draft measures. Next slide, please. So we're driving most of our stakeholder engagement through the Santa Clara County Climate Collaborative, which is a community of practice, and it advances regional solutions to climate change. And this collaborative is a network of public agencies such as cities and the county, academia, nonprofit and community-based organizations, and other community leaders. So the collaborative works to share, expertise and develop partnerships, but also to leverage joint funding opportunities, such as the one we're talking about today. So we formed a work group as part of this collaborative and invited San Benito County to join so that we could develop the PCAP with our stakeholders. Next slide, please. In addition to stakeholder engagement through the collaborative, we also are holding office hours at libraries in the community where community members can pop in and ask questions about the grant and fill out a survey just to provide on that spot feedback on the measures they'd like to see in the PCAP. And I know the slides will be available after. I won't go through all the dates, but we have them up there. Next slide, please. So as part of our PCAP, we're actually using existing greenhouse gas emissions inventories. And this slide is just an overview of the results from the Santa Clara County greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So those larger lines there are transportation, energy, and organic waste. And the combination of those sectors make up 95% of our emissions countywide in Santa Clara County. We'll also layer on San Benito County's emissions when we submit the PCAP. So we'll include both of those. Next slide. Another layer of analysis, as mentioned previously in this webinar, includes the analysis of low income and disadvantaged communities. You might hear that said as LIDAC communities. Here on the screen are the low income and disadvantaged communities that were identified in our MSA, and we use the U.S. Council on Environmental Quality's Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool to come up with these different census tracts that contain LIDAC communities. So as you can see, there are disadvantaged communities across jurisdictions in Santa Clara County, with a majority located in San Jose. And in San Benito County, there are a few disadvantaged communities that are located in Hollister. Next slide, please. This is just a visual representation of what I've mentioned previously. So you can see disadvantaged communities highlighted in dark teal in these maps, and the concentration on the Santa Clara side visible in San Jose on the left. Okay, next slide. So to our measures, we are still finalizing our measures in the PCAP with our stakeholders, and we will include building electrification measures and concentrating specifically on a program to electrify low and moderate income housing, but also include elements of workforce development and contractor support. Excuse me. We are also finalizing measures in other sectors, including transportation sector, including mobility hubs and transit decarbonization. And I'm sure the previous speaker is happy to say we've also got thinking on waste with food recovery and compost infrastructure hubs and community scale material reuse. We're also considering carbon sequestration, carbon smart agriculture practices, and a regional compost program with carbon credit financing. Excuse me, next slide, please. So short and sweet, that's our presentation. The final PCAP for our MSA will be available on the County of Santa Clara's website once it's submitted. And just encourage you to reach out to us via email if you have questions about this work or our office in general. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much for joining in and presenting all of that work. I would like to turn it over to Jamathan at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District to discuss your efforts as well.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to briefly share about the PCAP for the San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley MSA. I'm Jamison Rogers Gibson, a senior advisor on climate for the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and we're the lead agency for this MSA CPRG planning grant. I'm the staff lead, but I just want to give recognition to the amazing group of district staff, partners, and consultants that we're working with, and also express our deep gratitude for everyone who's participated in our process to date. I'll briefly share about our engagement process, and then I'll turn it over to Abby Young to very briefly touch upon our PCAP measures. Next slide. So this is an overview of the MSA. The federal designation included 5 counties: Alameda, Contra Costa, San Francisco, San Mateo, and Marin counties. And EPA approved an expansion of the area covered by the PCAP to include Napa County, and then the portions of Sonoma and Solano counties that are within the Air District's jurisdiction. And together, that is approximately 5.5 million people. On the right-hand side is a snapshot of our inventory, and I will highlight that transportation and buildings together account for half of our inventory. Next slide. A key partner in this work is our advisory work group, and it's composed of regional agencies shown on this slide, as well as local government staff representing the counties in the MSA, and then the cities named in the MSA as well. Next slide. We also sought input from local governments in order to understand their priorities and implementation-ready projects through a number of avenues that are listed on this slide. They also participated in a series of working sessions with stakeholders to design the PCAP measures. And in total, over 50 jurisdictions have participated in at least one outreach event. And we also did targeted outreach and engagement with PG&E and community choice aggregators, who also invited us to present to their community partners. Next slide. Because the PCAP timeframe is really fast and doesn't necessarily allow for a comprehensive community engagement process, the Air District relied on some recently completed engagement efforts and also on established avenues for engaging LIDACs, which we refer to as frontline communities for our planning effort. We synthesized results from these efforts, also had a survey and several external meetings to inform measure development, and we established an external roundtable of community serving organizations that had deep familiarity with Bay Area frontline communities to review our synthesis, add to it, and also add key implementation priorities. And they also were part of our working sessions. Next slide. We are very honored to include the following organizations as members of the roundtable: Emerald Cities Collaborative, Greenlining Institute, PODER, and Transform. Next slide. We also developed this map to show which communities we consider as frontline communities for this broader planning effort. And we use the 3 tools on the right-hand side of the slide, which include many of the communities of concern in the region. And just want to say that we recognize that for implementation applications, EPA is focusing on census tracts and block groups that are identified using the CGES tool and/or the EPA IRA Disadvantaged Communities tool, and that there is quite a bit of overlap with these frontline communities, in part because we used one of those tools to create this, and really want to encourage potential applicants in our MSA to develop projects or programs that also benefit these communities as well. Next slide. The Air District also held 4 measure design working sessions from October to December of last year with the support of BayREN, who's been a key partner through all of this, that brought together more than 80 stakeholders to develop our PCAP measures. And as you can see on the slide, it was a very diverse group of participants that brought a range of experiences and expertise. And it resulted in 2 detailed measure descriptions and also created a space to begin discussions on potential implementation grant proposals and partners. And during this period, the Air District also held a public workshop for feedback on our draft measure concepts. And now I will turn it over to Abby Young to very briefly touch upon the measures.
Great, thank you very much, Jameson. And we can go on to the next slide. Great, thank you. So through the engagement process that Jameson outlined, engagement with local governments, engagement with communities and community serving organizations, a lot of consensus emerged around 2 priority areas to focus on in the PCAP: residential building decarbonization for existing homes and transportation mode shift through mobility hubs. Now, as again, Jameson mentioned, together residential buildings and buildings and transportation represent about half of our region's greenhouse gas inventory. If we just look at existing residential buildings and passenger vehicles, those two components make up about 25% of our region's greenhouse gas emissions. So through these two measure areas, we're addressing a significant amount of the inventory. These measures were identified, these measure areas, as top priorities in the review of the 70+ local climate action plans in our region, and through the review of recently conducted community engagement that Jameson described, looking at, there emerged this sort of consensus around these two areas as really top priorities for greenhouse gas mitigation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our first measure, we've got two measures in our PCAP. The first measure is I'm going to give a high-level overview. I'm not going to go into great detail in either of these measures since we do have very detailed descriptions of both measures posted on our webpage that you can access today. And I believe we have a link to that webpage on our final slide. So our building measure accelerates electrification and energy efficiency retrofits in existing homes, prioritizing homes in frontline communities. Now, this includes strategies to provide a holistic approach to residential decarbonization, including a strategy to address deferred maintenance and health and safety concerns, which often prevent electrification upgrades from occurring at all. It also includes a community work group of community-based organizations, community members, and other partners to advise on and participate in the measures implementation, because we know we have to partner with community members if this is going to be successful. There's also a workforce development, contractor support, and policy components with a focus on housing security, which has emerged as a very, very high priority for communities. Next slide, please. So this measure aims to reduce single occupancy vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, by creating or expanding mobility hubs in frontline communities to facilitate mode shift away from single occupancy vehicle trips. So we're really talking about active transportation, shared transportation, options that will get people out of their single occupancy vehicles. And again, much more detail is available on our website. But what we're really thinking about with this measure is first mile, last mile improvements, bike ped infrastructure, micro-mobility, bike share, EV car share, EV charging, multimodal connectivity improvements, and also incentives like discounted transit fares and passes, and for both transit and bike share, e-bike incentives. There's a focus on ensuring that the design of these mobility hubs is informed by communities similar to our building measure. And so we're going to provide outreach and education as a big part of this measure. Both of these measures include more implementation actions than are included in these slides. So for example, our mobility hubs measure would also include urban greening associated with these neighborhood-based hubs. We're working with consultants right now to finalize the anticipated greenhouse gas emission reductions from each measure, as well as other analyses, and those results will be included in our final PCAP. Next slide, please. We'll, of course, post our PCAP after we submit it on March 1st, and this is the link to our webpage that includes links to the measures, links to some of our slide presentations, and you can also contact us through the climate@baaqmd.gov email. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jameson and Abby. We can go to the next slide. So this brings us to moving into the comment period where we can take questions and comments and feedback from webinar participants. As a reminder, if you'd like to share feedback or ask questions, please use the raise hand function, which should be located at the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window, as shown. When staff calls on your name and activates your audio controls, please click the unmute button and proceed to introduce yourself and provide your comment. Stakeholders will also be able to submit written feedback online until February 10th at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. And you can find a link to submit feedback on the state's Priority Climate Action Plan, as well as all of the relevant documentations for our CPRG meetings and workshops, as shown at this link here. As a reminder, we are limiting comments today to 3 minutes to accommodate as many people as we can. We also have a timer on the top right of the slide so that you know how much time you have remaining. With that, I will now pass it over to my colleague Tish, who will be facilitating our comment session.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to start with the top of my list. Apologies if I mispronounce your name, anyone. First, we have Salma Ibrahim. Salma, I've allowed you to speak. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Salma Ibrahim here. Thank you, Sarah, and everyone for the presentation. I have a quick question for Graham that presented about the Department of Conservation's expanding the biomass to carbon negative biofuels program. My question is, I know that the phase 2 of the original program was defunded recently. Will funding from the CPRG also reinstate that phase 2, or will it just go to expanding the program overall?
Most likely there's not an intent at the moment, I believe, to restart phase 2 of that particular program.
Okay, thank you so much.
And sorry, just to go on about that, partly is because with the federal grant we could expand it in scope, but yeah, the phase 2 of that grant program is pretty much on hold at the time. So yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Salma. Next on my list is Layla Atala. Layla, I've granted you the ability to unmute yourself. Feel free to begin.
Thank you. My name is Layla Atala. I'm with RMI. I wondered if there are plans to include any state level buildings focused measures in CARB's PCAP. The two regional applications include great buildings focused measures, but I didn't hear about anything focused on residential or commercial buildings at the state level. And if that's not a plan for inclusion, can you please share a little bit more about why not?
Thank you, Layla. That's a good question. We decided to focus our efforts, as you may have heard from Luam, and Luam, I invite you to speak up as well, really on the upstream needs related to the building sector. So on the energy side and on the distribution side and the grid capacity side to enable some of those downstream electrification options. And we definitely wanted to be complementary to what MSAs have been proposing. And that's one of the reasons that we have focused on what the state has the unique authority to implement.
All right, thank you, Layla. Next on my list is Joel White. I've enabled your audio. Feel free to unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for your time with this. I tuned in yesterday and then again today. Sarah, maybe you could help me. It's with regards to the forestry, in particular forest smoke, smoke from wildfires, if that's mentioned anywhere on a state level. And then also, where could we get a bit more of a deep dive information into what's happening on the forestry front? Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. will have to keep my comments fairly high level since this is not really an area of expertise for me. But included in our PCAP, there are two measures that would affect kind of wildfire management, and those are the CAL FIRE program, the Healthy Forest program. Our measure would include kind of expanding the success of that and reducing some of the fuel in the forest and helping to help with habitats and reforestation activities. And in addition, I think that there is also a tie with the program that Graham was mentioning. Some of those activities can also help improve forest health and reduce the risk associated with wildfires. And if you wanted to read more, our draft PCAP is live on our website, so you can dig into those measures in a bit more detail and reference the programs themselves that they are referencing and that are referenced in our PCAP.
Great, I'll check that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joel. Next on my list is David Frisbee. David, I've enabled your audio. Feel free to unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, yeah, Dave Frisbee with Monterey Bay Air Resource District. I'm wondering if CARB will be funneling any of the CPRG funding to local air districts, for example, through any existing programs such as Farmer and the Wood Smoke Reduction Program.
Yeah, so those are really good questions. It kind of depends on the way that our applications would eventually be structured. So some of the programs that it sounds like you know very well, we work with air districts as kind of implementing partners to help distribute those funds. So it just kind of depends on which measure we might include in our applications. You know, a Farmer and the wood stove a change out program are not currently listed in our PCAP, but the core program does touch a little bit on agricultural equipment and allows for local jurisdictions to pursue that funding themselves if they want to fill out their own application as well. So air districts are an eligible entity under CPRG.
Okay, so just as a follow-up, I want to make sure that if we are applying, that we're not duplicating something that CARB is already applying for. How would we know that in advance?
So I think the best way to do that is just to stay in touch with us. So if you are thinking of submitting an application, if you can send an email to our CPRG email address or leave a comment at this page, that would be helpful to know so that we can just stay in coordination as we both finalize our application strategies.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's great questions.
Thank you, Dave. Next on my list will be Kathy Carriage. Kathy, I've enabled your audio. Feel free to unmute and begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Very comprehensive. I'm going to have to go back and watch this again because you covered so much information. I live in Solano County, and I have to confess, I haven't heard much about meetings there through BACMed. So I think maybe the outreach needs to improve just a little bit. I wanted to just make a couple of comments. One is, will funding for, I live in Benicia, so I'm thinking, is my local community, which is not an EJ community, how much funding is going to be able to go to communities that aren't EJ communities? And the other question I have or comment is just that I'm glad that when you talked about biofuels, you talked about agricultural waste. You know, we're dealing with the conversion of a biofuel plant with P66 and suspect they'll be using mostly soybean oil. So I think it's very important to, you know, stick with the waste products that we have here. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments and the question. In terms of how exactly the money will flow, I do believe that, you know, the Justice 40 goals that EPA has, and I invite the MSA leads who've been looking at this documentation to confer, corroborate, or dispel. I believe they have a goal of sending at least 40% of the funds either directly within or to benefit low-income and disadvantaged communities as they have defined it. So I think that's kind of one area of guidance. I think ultimately what ends up being applied for and what ends up being awarded will determine kind of which communities and which projects actually get funded. So a lot is still up in the air.
All right, thank you, Kathy. Next is Catherine Larson. Catherine, I've enabled your audio. Feel free to unmute yourself and begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Catherine Larson and I'm with SMUD. And I had a question about the energy measures, specifically measures 2 and 3, which are the funding for distribution system upgrades and expanding the SCHIP program. And my question was whether publicly owned utilities that aren't part of the CPUC's jurisdiction would be eligible for these funds through the state programs. Thank you.
I see that Luwa maybe had to drop off. So maybe we can refer your question back to her. If you wouldn't mind putting that question in our through the comment box, that through the link here. I think that will be the best way for us to track and make sure that we get you an answer. If you don't mind doing that, that would be very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Catherine. Next will be Tim Frank. Tim, I've enabled your audio. Feel free to begin.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Terrific. Well, I mean, I'm really excited about the overall objective of this work, but I actually want to first note that I'm representing the building trades, and I have been engaged on behalf of the building trades councils in the Bay Area. I did all the staff work supporting their work on Rules 9.4 and 9.6 of the Air District, and I did the staff work on their input to Plan Bay Area 2050. So I've been engaged in a lot of work on behalf of the building trades for a long time. And one of the things I'm a little concerned about is that we have not been treated as a marquee stakeholder by any of the groups here. You didn't see mention of the building trades in any of the presentations today. And though we haven't been entirely rebuffed, I mean, I have participated in 2 of the working group meetings of the Bay Area Quality Management District. We've been very much a secondary partner. And if you look at the actual metrics about what they're measuring, there's no focus on specifically on high road jobs. And I actually think that there's opportunities for improvement and hope that between now and March 1st that we'll have an opportunity to provide some input and perhaps actually get a little bit of revisions that can help place the importance of high road jobs a little higher in the priority for these programs, because I actually think it's critically important that as we transition from fossil fuels, which have the industries have provided a lot of good union jobs, towards these renewable industries, that we make sure that the new jobs are comparable in quality to the old jobs. And that's something that's really important for social equity. And I think it's also critically important for building political support for these programs. And we want to be a good partner for you guys and are ready to be active and constructive in working on these things and want to be given some priority.
Thank you, Tim. That's really helpful to hear. If your comments are for this state, I encourage you to list that in our written comments as well. And your points are well taken here as well. Thank you.
Sarah Jo, can I respond?
Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. And we really appreciate your participation in both the PCAP and the rule development and implementation process for sure. And we absolutely are going to have a big discussion about high road jobs in the PCAP. So that's a really important point, and I'm so very glad that you raised it. Especially when we're talking about building decarbonization, we really can't talk about it without talking about the jobs component. And so we hope to have a robust discussion in the PCAP. So thank you for raising that.
And I think that's it for hands raised, unless anyone had any other last minute questions or comments.
Maybe just take a moment to make sure if people are thinking about raising their hand, just give you one last chance to make a point, ask a question. Okay. Well, if we can go to the next slide, I'll list some next steps and ways to keep in touch. And just first of all, thank you for all of the feedback today. We really appreciate it. And we encourage anybody who is still sitting on a comment or who had a longer thought to submit written feedback online, at least for the state. You can find the link to do so on this slide here. And we look forward to reviewing those comments. In addition, we want to encourage any eligible entities who have submitted ideas to our PCAP and are not otherwise under a local planning grant to really start to think about what an application strategy might look like. I'm listing here an EPA website that is full of different information and resources and tools to get started on applications. And again, if you are thinking of applying, I hope you'll stay in touch with us here at the state so that we can track who is applying for what. You can do that through this comment box or through contacting us at the email address that's listed on our CPRG webpage. And last but not least, I really want to thank all of my state colleagues for the joint work that is the CPRG effort, as well as the MSAs that we heard from today. It's a joy to present with you, and just thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for your attention. This is the end of our webinar. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye.